My name is Benny. I am the owner and head roaster and one of the baristas at Mundo Coffeehouse and Roastery in downtown Round Rock. Today I want to do a masterclass in one of my favorite coffee brewing techniques, which is the pour over. And you'll see here we got an array of different equipment. And why I want to show you this is not just because it's my favorite method, but it's also one of the cheapest way to get started into high-end specialty coffee. So with further ado, let's get going on it. So let's start with fundamentally what is a pour over, why is it different from everything else. So pour over, what it is similar to like your automatic drip coffee machine, except you're doing it manually. So you're putting you have a better ground coffee, you're pouring hot water through it, and it's kind of flowing through it. So pretty much coffee and water is coming together and being playing around, being extracted to provide that really beautiful flavor. Why I mentioned the flow of water with the coffee bed is because there's other brewing methods. So we have the pour over, which is similar to drip, and espresso, where the water and coffee comes in contact for a short period of time and flows through. The other brew method is called the French press, or more like immersion brewing, where you have a French press or a cold brew brewing technique where the water and coffee sits together for a longer period of time. So why we have these different brew methods? One, they provide different styles of coffee. The French press, which is the immersion brew, provides a more bolder, deeper flavor of coffee because you have water and coffee put together in a very long period of time. You get more extraction, you get more flavors, but you also get a lot of things that you might not want. So it's more of in terms of particular taste and the type of coffee you're using. The pour over is a little bit different because when I mentioned when it just flows through, you're only getting extracting the parts of the coffee that the water comes in contact with. So shorter brewing time, you get more of a cleaner, a smoother cup of coffee, but then you might lose out on some of those other flavors that a French press would. But the reason why I like that crisp flavor, and I like to drink my coffee as it is. So this is a great way to get the highlight notes of your single origin coffee and really understand what the flavors are with the coffee you're brewing. So what do you really need when we start a pour over? Pretty much you need hot water, which you can get it through a kettle. I prefer a gooseneck kettle because as I mentioned, this is a very interesting technique. I think I forgot to mention with pour over how this differs directly to a drip coffee machine is that you're doing the work. You're doing all the work in terms of pouring the water. And even though this takes more time, more technique and energy, this provides better control of how the flavors of the coffee. So you can control how much water goes through and how fast. And that really gives flavor in a way that you can't really get with the automatic drip coffee machine. So going back to what you need, the kettle is very important. It brews hot water. Hot water is required for extraction and getting that great cup of coffee. You can get a $10 kettle. That's fine. That's what a lot of people have. So you can go with that. And the only one notion is that if you use one of those cheaper kettles, boil the water and wait 5 minutes before using it. Coffee likes a temperature about anywhere from 195 to 205, which is below boiling water temperature. Get too high of water temperature, you end up having too much bitterness in your cup, which can lead to undesirable flavors. So why I'm showcasing this one is that I like this one because you can control the temperature, and also with the gooseneck you can control the flow better. But don't need this. If you don't have one of these or you can't afford one, a normal kettle is fine. It's just a more point of preference, but you can still get an amazing cup of coffee. The second thing it would get people to get in terms of equipment is a grinder. So I have this is more of a home grinder. This is really good, and why having a grinder is really important is that coffee loses a lot of its freshness after being ground. So I know it's been a really messy way of brewing coffee, but it's one of the things that if you want to get the full flavor of the coffee, especially if you're spending a lot of money on the coffee, grinding coffee fresh is really important. Don't need to do it, but it's also something I would recommend. So we have that. You got water. So I have some water in here. Water is 95% of your coffee. So do not put tap water if you can. I think the easiest thing to do is to put bottled water. I don't prefer it as it's packaging, but if you get some RO water and use that, that's perfectly fine. But your water is really important. So if your water doesn't taste good, it'll make it coffee taste bad. And then another thing I would recommend, a scale. This is a coffee brewing scale with a timer. Don't really need an inexpensive scale. A cheap scale is fine. Why is it important? You need to measure your coffee, how much coffee you're using, and you also need to measure how much water you're going to be using, because I'll get into why we need to do that. And then obviously the pour over vessel. This one's a little pricey one, which is a Chemex one. There's a lot more cheaper ones you can get. It's not as important. Also, you notice I have a metal filter here. Metal filters are good for two reasons. One, better for the environment. I'm going to repeat that many times. This is Mundo after all. And also, the flavor you get from a metal filter is a little more nuanced, a little more bolder. When we use a paper filter, the paper filter takes away some of the oils that coffee has naturally. And when you're brewing it, it actually provides more of a crisper flavor, but you lose that a little bit body. So using one of these provides a more body to your coffee. And obviously it's easier to clean. It's just dump the grounds into a compost bin and rinse, and you're ready to go. So let's get started. Oh, I forgot. Another main ingredient is your coffee. So you really need coffee to make coffee. So I got some coffee beans here. This is a medium dark roast Peruvian coffee. We make in Mundo, and the reason why I'm emphasizing this is that this dark roast has a lot of dark chocolate flavors and notes, and you'll see that it has a lot of gas, and that you'll see what kind of technique we need to further on do the pour over, and which will be in the bloom. So with all that said, we want to first set our temperature. Going into a little bit of coffee science, the darker the roast, the less energy you need to extract. So as a roaster, when we roast coffee, we roast from light to dark. The lighter roast has more natural organic flavors that comes from the farms, while darker roast has more of a development flavor that comes from the roaster. But with that said, the darker the roast, the lower temperature you need. So when we talk about what water temperature we need for brewing coffee, we look at the roast level and then determine from there what the water temperature is. So with a dark roast, we want to put it at around 195 to 197. So a lower temperature. When we talk about light roast, we would want a higher temperature, as the bean hasn't been roasted and broken down as much. We need more energy, aka heat, to extract the coffee. So when you do a lighter roast, we look at anywhere from 200 to 205 degrees Fahrenheit. So we get that warmed up. We did already put some water in here. Let's talk about brew ratios. So when we want to figure out how much coffee we need to first figure out how much water or how big of a cup of coffee we want. So I'm gonna do about 450 milliliters of water. I know that's not a very American in terms of measurements, but this is the easiest way we can really develop a recipe. So 450 milliliters of water. So we need to figure out how much grams of coffee we need. With a pour over, it's good to start at a 1:16 ratio of coffee to water. So for 16 milliliters, we need about 1 gram of coffee. So I'm going to do some quick maths here. I haven't done this ratio for a little while. So we got 450 milliliters. We divide by 16, and we need about 28 grams of coffee to make this recipe. So 1 to 16 ratio is your standard. If you want something a little more lighter and easier to drink, you can go to a 1 to 17 or 1 to 18 ratio. If you want something heavier and bolder, we go to a 1 to 15 to 1 to 14 ratio. With pour overs, you probably don't want to go any heavier because you're trying to get more of a cleaner flavor, but that's a personal preference for you. So, as I said, we're doing 450 milliliters. We have a scale here, so we're going to zero it out. We're going to measure about 28 grams. About 29, so let's take a few out. All right, we got 28.5 grams, so we'll keep it at that. And then we got a trusty grinder here. See, we'll pour in the amount. So one of the best things to do is single dose. Measure out how much coffee, put in your grinder. Then we'll start the grinder off. As we're doing that, we'll wait for that to finish. See that? Alright. And it's always good to remeasure your coffee grind just in case if there's any changes. So we actually added a little bit more, like a half a gram, which meant there was something still stuck in there, which is fine for now. We have our vessel here. So we have preheated the water. When we want to kind of heat up the vessel as well. This is a little bit before we get into it, so just add a little bit just to get it all warmed up. And especially with a what's called a metal filter, it's good to wet the filter a little bit so the coffee sticks. So I forgot to mention, grind size is important. You want it to be a medium grind size or medium coarse, especially for a metal filter. Right? Depending on what pour over system you have, there might be a little bit difference in terms of the grind size based on the filter. But for this metal filter, we do a bit of a medium to medium coarse setting. Put that back in there. So it's all warmed up. You can see it's a little bit heated. We'll pour into our little dumping cup. All right, let's get started. So we got a bit of a view up here. So put the coffee in there. We're going to zero it out. Pour the coffee in. And what I like to do is distribute the grind so you got an even bed. So we got about 29 grams of coffee in there. We're gonna zero it out and we're gonna start pouring the coffee in. So this process should take about anywhere from 3 to 4 minutes. If it's any shorter than that, that means you ground the coffee too coarse and you need to fine up the grind a little bit. If it's going way too slowly, the coffee grind is too fine and it's just choking in terms of trying to get water through. So this is a good time to actually change your recipe for next time. But we'll go ahead and try this out. So the water is preheated, and then we're gonna first start the bloom. So the first 30 seconds, we're gonna add about a third of the water, anywhere from a quarter to a third of the water into the vessel. And then from there, we're gonna let it sit for about 30 seconds. So we're gonna start the timer. And then I'm gonna start the brew. So you're gonna slowly pour, do a bit of a circular motion. It's not just for looks, the circular motion, but it's also to get all the coffee in there. So we're gonna put about 100 grams of water. And you can see on the top view, there's a bit of a explosion of gases coming out of the coffee. This is what we call a bloom. The bloom is important because that's where CO2 is being pretty much being expelled out of the coffee beans. And this is a great way of seeing how fresh your coffee is. If it's blooming like this, that means there's a lot of gases coming out. That means the coffee is really fresh. If it doesn't bloom like this, it means your coffee is really old or has been ground and it's been sitting for a little while. So it's a good way of checking freshness. So if you go to the store, buy a bag of coffee, and then you don't see this happening, that means the coffee has been sitting on that shelf for too long, and you probably should return it. So it's been about 30 seconds. We'll keep on going with the pour. And this is more of the development of the brew. So we'll just keep on going with this. So we're about 2 minutes and 30 seconds at 195 grams. So like I said, we need to go to 450. So we're just gonna keep going. No. You can see the coffee is coming through really nicely and smelling amazing as well. So we're at about almost 2 minutes, and we're at 300 milliliters of water coming through. So when we talk about how it's different from drip coffee, we're doing the work making sure everything is being submerged with water. So we're visually looking at it, we're making sure every bit of coffee is being touched by water, and also we're making sure that there's no imperfections when we're brewing. So one thing I like to do just before the end, I kind of like to stir the coffee as well, like the slurry, so that even adds more even extraction to the coffee. So we're at 2 minutes and 36 seconds. We're going to add the final amount. Just make sure it's all evened out. And there we go, 450 milliliters, sorry. And then we're just going to stir a little bit and then let it sit. And now the fun part is waiting. You can smell the aroma, you can see the bubbles coming through. This is a very fresh coffee. I mean, obviously I roasted myself, and we roasted this on the, I think the 26th, which is about 4 days old. So when we talk about coffee being brewed, freshness is important, but too fresh is also an issue. If you have coffee that is less than a day old or 2 days old, the flavors and nuance on it will be a lot different than it would be if it's 4 or 5 days old. So a good time to have your cup of coffee and brew it is about at least 3 to 5 days after roast. You can have it earlier, but take note that the flavor changes will be significant. And that has to do with all the gases, including the CO2, being released rapidly in the first couple days. So we're almost there. About 4 minutes and it's pretty much finished. I'm just gonna slur it out. So since it's past 4 minutes, I could tell that my grind size might have been slightly too fine. So I'll coarsen up for next time with that same recipe. And the beauty of this process is that you're gonna do all these variables you can control. And you take note of it every time you do it. And once you take note of it and you taste coffee, if it tastes amazing, don't need to change anything. Keep it as it is. Even if it goes past 4 minutes or 5 minutes and the coffee tastes amazing, you can keep it as it is. All these rules and things I've been talking about, they're not really rules, they're just guidelines, and you can make the change based on your flavor, what you want from your coffee and what coffee you're using. So we're done here. Put that there. I didn't bring my mug, but last thing you want to do is give it a bit of a swirl. Throughout the whole process of brewing, the different parts of the coffee has been extracted. So at the bottom, you'll get more of the acidic flavors. In the middle, you get more sweetness, and at the very end, you get the bitterness. So it's very important to give it a bit of a swirl and let it mix before you have your cup of coffee, so you have an even flavor from the coffee. And that's it. That's your pour over. My name is Benny, and I'm the owner of Mundo Coffeehouse and Roastery, and this is how you do a pour over.